Lieutenant Sarah Chen's finger hovered over the trigger, her breath forming ice crystals in the Afghan dawn. Through her scope, 3,247 meters away, over 2 miles of thin mountain air, Hassan Nazari, the butcher of Kandahar, sipped tea by his window, completely oblivious to the crosshairs tracking his every movement. "Abort mission. I repeat, abort mission," crackled Commander Jack Reese's voice through her earpiece, sharp and final. AC-130 gunship is down with mechanical failure. That distance is impossible for a ground shot. Fall back to extraction point Alpha. But Sarah saw something else through her powerful optics, something that made her blood run cold. Children, dozens of them, wearing backpacks and colorful hijabs, filing into the compound school building like innocent lambs walking into a slaughterhouse. Intelligence had reported the school was closed. Intelligence was wrong. Tomorrow's airstrike would turn those children into statistics. The wind screamed across the barren ridge at 12 knots, gusting to 15, carrying the scent of snow from the peaks above. Beside her, Petty Officer Marcus Hayes, her spotter and only ally in a world that didn't want her, frantically worked his ballistic computer, his weathered face growing paler with each calculation. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, his southern drawl tight with fear. "Even Chris Kyle wouldn't attempt this. Even the Canadian who holds the world record had multiple attempts in perfect conditions. The bullet will drop 784 feet. It'll travel for over 7 seconds. Wind shear at 3 different altitudes. Temperature inversions. Mirage effects from the rising sun." He looked at her with desperate eyes. "This isn't just difficult, it's mathematically insane." Sarah's heart rate slowed to 40 beats per minute, a trick she'd learned from her father in the Montana wilderness, hunting elk before dawn when she was just 12 years old. Her Marine Corps veteran father, who never saw combat due to a training injury that shattered his knee, had poured every ounce of his unlived warrior dreams into his daughter. "Baby girl," he told her while teaching her to read wind through grass movements, "shooting isn't about the gun. It's about becoming part of the bullet's journey. You and that round become one thing, one purpose, one destiny." Through her scope, she watched Nazari laugh at something one of his lieutenants said. This was the man who'd orchestrated the Kandahar marketplace bombing that killed 47 people, including a group of schoolgirls buying bread. The man who'd filmed himself executing aid workers and posted it online. The man who'd evaded capture for 3 years, always one step ahead, always untouchable. Until now. "Negative on abort, sir," Sarah transmitted, her voice steady as steel. "I have the shot, I can make this." The radio exploded with Commander Reese's fury. "Lieutenant Chen, that is a direct order. You will stand down immediately. This is not up for debate." But Sarah was already beyond hearing, beyond fear, beyond doubt. She was entering that crystalline state of perfect clarity that only the best snipers ever achieve, where time slows, where breath becomes music, where the entire universe contracts to a single point of absolute focus. Marcus grabbed her shoulder. "Sarah, please, I've been spotting for 12 years. I've worked with the best. This shot will end your career even if you miss. And if you miss, Nazari goes underground again and those kids still die in tomorrow's strike." She turned to him, and he saw something in her eyes that made him release his grip. It wasn't arrogance or recklessness. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that separates the good from the legendary. "Marcus, I've trained 10,000 hours for this exact moment. Every variable, every possible condition, every scenario." She adjusted her scope with micro-precision, elevating the crosshairs to a point that seemed absurdly high above the distant window. "My father told me I'd have to be twice as good as any man to get half the respect, so I became 10 times better." She'd studied Nazari's patterns for 6 weeks, every movement, every habit, every ritual. Every morning at 5:47, he took his tea to that specific window. Every morning he paused for exactly 3 seconds, facing Mecca before his prayers, his body perfectly still. That 3-second window was all she needed. Marcus ran the calculations one final time, his hands shaking. The math was brutal. Wind compensation, 4.2 milliradians left. Elevation, 47.3 milliradians up. Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation, 0.8 milliradians right. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, every factor screaming that this was impossible. "I've never told you this," Sarah whispered, her eye pressed to the scope, "but I've never shot beyond 2,100 meters in training." Marcus froze. "What?" "But I've calculated this shot 1,000 times in my head. I know it's possible. I know it like I know my own heartbeat." She glanced at her watch. 0546:30. 30 seconds until Nazari appeared. "Trust the math, Marcus, trust me." The radio crackled again, Commander Reese, and this time his voice carried something different. Not anger, but the weight of an impossible decision. "One shot, Chen," he transmitted quietly. "God help us both make it count." Sarah's world narrowed to the reticle. Her breathing stopped between heartbeats. The universe held its breath. And Hassan Nazari stepped into view. 6 months earlier, Sarah sat rigidly at attention across from Commander Jack Reese in his Spartan office at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The walls were decorated with only 3 things: an American flag, a photo of his SEAL team from Ramadi in 2006, and a shadow box containing the medals of men who never came home. "Female snipers are a political experiment," Reese said coldly, sliding her personnel file across the gunmetal gray desk. His eyes, hard as flint, never left hers. "And I don't do experiments with my teams. I lost 6 good men in Ramadi trusting someone's gut instinct over tactical doctrine. I won't risk my warriors on diversity quotas and social engineering." Sarah's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire military career, at basic training, at advanced individual training, at Scout Sniper School, where she'd outshot 47 men to claim the top graduate position. Growing up in the mountains of Montana, she'd been the girl who outhunted every boy in 3 counties. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Robert Chen, USMC, Ret, had taught her to shoot at age 7 with a .22 rifle almost as long as she was tall. By 12, she could hit a target at 800 meters. By 16, she was winning competitive shooting championships against adults. "Check my qualification scores, sir," Sarah said, her voice level but carrying an edge of steel. "Marksmanship, 100%. Stalking exercises, 100%. Unknown distance shooting, 98.7%, highest in my class. Physical fitness, superior in all categories. Psychological evaluation, exceptional stress tolerance and decision-making under pressure." Reese leaned back in his chair, studying her like a predator assessing potential prey. "Your scores are impressive, Lieutenant. I'll give you that. But paper doesn't bleed. Paper doesn't scream when it's dying. Paper doesn't make you question every decision when you're holding your teammates' intestines in your hands, watching the light go out of his eyes." He stood, walked to the photo of his old team, his finger tracing over the faces of the dead. "Ramadi, November 2006. We had intelligence on a high-value target. Perfect setup, perfect plan. But the kid on Overwatch, 22 years old, top of his class, confident as hell, he missed a spotter on a rooftop. Just one enemy fighter that he didn't see." Reese's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The IED that fighter called and killed 6 of my brothers. 6 men with wives, children, parents waiting for them to come home. All because one sniper thought he was good enough when he wasn't." Sarah remained silent, understanding this wasn't really about her. This was about ghosts that Commander Reese carried like a second skin. He turned back to her, his face a mask of controlled pain. "So when some admirals tell me I have to accept women into my sniper units because it's the modern Navy, you'll forgive me if I'm not enthusiastic. Combat isn't progressive. Combat is brutally honest about capability and weakness. and weakness gets people killed. With respect, sir, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm not asking you to lower standards or make accommodations. I'm asking you to judge me by the same metrics you judge every operator. She stood, meeting his eyes with unwavering intensity. You want honesty? Here it is. I'm not here because I'm a woman. I'm here despite being a woman. And that means I've had to be better, work harder, and prove myself more times than any man in this building. Something flickered in Reese's eyes, not quite respect, but perhaps the recognition of a fellow warrior who understood sacrifice. My father gave up his dream of being a Marine raider when he shattered his knee in training, Sarah continued. He spent his life teaching me that excuses are for people who accept limitations. I don't accept limitations, Commander. I obliterate them. Reese returned to his desk, opening her file again. You'll deploy with SEAL Team 7 to Afghanistan. Your spotter will be Petty Officer Marcus Hayes, 15 years in Special Operations, 7 deployments, 89 confirmed kills. He requested to work with you specifically after reviewing your scores. A ghost of surprise crossed Sarah's face. Hayes is the best spotter in naval special warfare. He's also the most brutally honest operator I've ever met. If you're not good enough, he'll tell you. If you're a liability, he'll report it. And if you make one mistake, just one, that compromises mission success or endangers my team, you're done. Not just with sniping, done with special operations entirely. Sarah stood at attention. Understood, sir. No, Lieutenant, I don't think you do. Reese's voice carried the weight of dead men and broken promises. In Ramadi, I learned that confidence kills. Competence saves lives. You're about to enter a world where the enemy doesn't care about your gender, your politics, or your feelings. They only care about killing Americans. He paused, letting the words sink in. Every trigger pull you make will be judged, every decision questioned. Every success will be attributed to luck, and every failure will be used as evidence that women don't belong. Sarah's eyes blazed. Then I won't fail, sir. Everyone fails eventually, Lieutenant. Reese closed her file with finality. The question is whether you'll fail when it matters most. 3 weeks later, Sarah landed at Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, where the real test would begin. Sarah's world collapsed into pure mathematics, every variable a life-or-death equation that had to balance perfectly. Wind, 12 knots from the northwest, gusting to 15, with different velocities at different altitudes between her position and the target. Temperature, 42 degrees F at her elevation and rising as the sun climbed over the Hindu Kush Mountains. Barometric pressure, 29.8 inches of mercury and falling, meaning the air was thinning, offering less resistance but also less predictability. Distance, 3,247 meters, a number that seemed to mock the very concept of possibility. Marcus ran the ballistic calculations on his Kestrel weather meter and ballistic computer for the 3rd time, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Sarah, listen to me. The bullet drop alone is 784 feet. That's a 78-story building. You're not aiming at the target. You're aiming at where the target will be in 7.2 seconds, accounting for Earth's rotation, wind drift at 3 different altitudes, temperature gradients, and the Coriolis effect. He pulled up the data on his screen, showing her the brutal reality in green digital numbers. The margin of error is less than 1 milliradian. That's the thickness of a dime at arm's length. A single butterfly beating its wings in that valley could create enough air disturbance to throw this shot off by 6 inches. Sarah adjusted her Schmidt and Bender scope with micro-precision clicks, each adjustment representing 0.1 milliradians. Click, click, click. The crosshairs rose higher and higher above the distant window until she was aiming at what appeared to be empty sky, a point so absurdly elevated that any observer would think she'd lost her mind. Her Macmillan TAC-50 rifle lay perfectly settled on its bipod, the .50 BMG cartridge chambered and waiting. This weapon system was capable of the distance, barely, but it demanded absolute perfection from the shooter. The rifle could do its job. The bullet could do its job. The question was whether she could do hers. "I've studied Nazari for 6 weeks," Sarah whispered, more to herself than Marcus. "Every morning, same routine. Tea at 5:47, walks to the east window, pauses for 3 seconds facing Mecca before morning prayers. In those 3 seconds, he's perfectly still." Marcus adjusted his spotting scope, the powerful optics bringing the compound into sharp relief despite the distance. "Sarah, I've worked with the best snipers in the world. Navy SEALs, Marine Scout snipers, Army Delta Force shooters. The longest confirmed kill before this was 3,540 meters by a Canadian Joint Task Force 2 sniper. You know what the difference is between that shot and this one?" 418 meters, Sarah answered quietly. "No, the difference is that the Canadian had multiple attempts over several days, perfect weather conditions, a stationary target, and no time pressure." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "You have one bullet, terrible conditions, a moving target, and children's lives hanging in the balance. This isn't confidence, Sarah. This is suicide." She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Not arrogance or bravado, but a deep, unshakable certainty that transcended rational thought. "When I was 15, my father took me hunting in the Beartooth Mountains during a snowstorm," she said softly. "We tracked a bull elk for 3 days. On the 3rd day, I had one shot through a gap in the trees at 600 meters, with wind gusting to 20 knots and snow falling so hard I could barely see the scope. My dad said, 'Baby girl, you can take the safe shot and maybe wound him, or you can trust everything I've taught you and make the impossible shot.'" Marcus listened, transfixed. "I made that shot, dropped the elk clean through the heart. My father cried, only time I ever saw him cry. He said, 'That's the difference between good shooters and great ones. Good shooters know their limitations. Great shooters know that limitations are just variables that haven't been solved yet.'" She returned her eye to the scope, her breathing settling into the deep, rhythmic pattern of absolute focus. "I've run this calculation 1,000 times in my head, Marcus, in the shower, before sleep, during physical training. I know this shot like I know my own heartbeat." Marcus checked his watch. 0546, 15. 45 seconds until Nazari's routine would bring him to the window. He made one final adjustment to his spotting scope, then pulled out his range card where he documented every environmental factor. "Okay," he whispered, his voice hoarse with resignation and something that might have been faith. "Okay. Wind call 12 knots northwest, gusting 15. Hold 4.2 mils left for wind, 47.3 mils up for elevation, 0.8 mils right for Coriolis. Temperature 43 degrees and rising. Pressure 29.79 and falling. Humidity 34%. Sarah made the final microscopic adjustments, her fingers moving with surgical precision. The crosshairs settled on a point in space that seemed to defy all logic, high above the compound, offset dramatically to the right, aiming at nothing but empty air and mathematical faith. "I've never told you this," she whispered, "but I've never attempted anything beyond 2,100 meters in training, not even close." Marcus went rigid. "Sarah." "But I know I can make this shot, Marcus. I know it the way I know the sun will rise, the way I know my own name." She paused. "Trust the math, trust me." The radio crackled with Commander Reese's voice, heavy with the weight of an impossible decision. "One shot, Chen. God help us both. Make it count." Through the scope, movement. A door opening in the distant compound. 0547-00. Hassan Nazari stepped into the frame, a small porcelain cup of tea in his hands, steam rising in delicate spirals. Sarah's heart rate dropped to 38 beats per minute. Her finger found the trigger. The universe held its breath. At Bagram Airfield, 60 kilometers away, Commander Jack Reese stood in the Tactical Operations Center. his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the tactical display console. The massive screen showed real-time drone footage of the compound, and a smaller monitor displayed Sarah's vital signs transmitted from her biometric sensors: heart rate, 38 BPM, respiratory rate, 4 breaths per minute, core temperature, normal. She was in the zone, the place where elite warriors went when death became a science. Negative, abort mission immediately, Reese barked into the radio, his voice carrying the command authority of 2 decades in naval special warfare. Lieutenant Chen, this is a direct order. Fall back to extraction point Alpha. Acknowledge. Static, then Sarah's voice calm as a frozen lake. Negative on abort, sir. I have the shot. I can make this. The TOC erupted. 15 operators, intelligence analysts, and communication specialists turned to stare at Reese, waiting for the explosion they knew was coming. But he stood perfectly still, his face a mask carved from granite, only his jaw muscles betraying the storm raging inside. Commander, his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Okoye, stepped beside him. A former Army Ranger who transferred to the Navy and earned her trident through sheer determination. She was one of the few people who could speak candidly to Reese. Sir, the airstrike window for tomorrow puts those children directly in the blast radius. Chen might be our only option. Our only option. Reese's voice was dangerously quiet. Our only option is a female lieutenant who's been in country for 4 months, attempting a shot that would be impossible for the best snipers in the world, disobeying a direct order, and risking the entire mission on ego and emotion. Okoye didn't flinch. Is that what you really see, Jack, or are you seeing Ramadi? The name hit him like a physical blow. Reese's eyes flashed to the photo he kept in his breast pocket. His team, Ramadi 2006, all of them young and immortal, and unaware that half of them would be dead within a week. Don't, he growled. Someone has to say it. Okoye's voice softened but remained firm. You've been carrying those 6 men on your back for 18 years. You swore you'd never trust instinct over doctrine again. You swore you'd never let emotion override tactical judgment. And when women started integrating into combat roles, you saw them as walking emotional liabilities. Reese turned away from the screens, his fists clenched. Because they are. Combat doesn't care about progressive politics or social experiments. Combat exposes weakness, and weakness kills. Chen isn't weak, Okoye countered. She's top of her class in every metric. Hayes requested to work with her. Hayes, Jack. The man who's been your most trusted operator for a decade. He saw something in her that made him believe. Hayes is on that ridge with her, which means if she's wrong, I lose both of them. Reese's voice cracked. You want me to authorize a suicide mission based on a rookie's confidence. You want me to trust that a woman who's never faced real pressure won't fold when it matters most. The TOC had gone completely silent. Every person present knew they were witnessing something rare. Commander Reese's armor cracking. The ghosts he'd kept buried for nearly 2 decades clawing their way to the surface. On the main screen, the drone footage showed children continuing to file into the school building. 47 of them now, backpacks and bright hijabs, laughing and playing, completely unaware that tomorrow's airstrike would turn their sanctuary into a crematorium. Ramadi wasn't your fault, Okoye said quietly. The after-action report cleared you. The investigation cleared you. Everyone except you has forgiven you for what happened. Tommy Hendricks was 22 years old, Reese whispered, staring at nothing. The kid on Overwatch who missed the spotter. He was so confident, so sure of himself. Reminded me of myself at that age. I trusted him because he reminded me of me. His voice broke. And that confidence, that arrogant, stupid confidence, killed 6 men. 6 brothers who trusted me to keep them safe. He turned back to the screens, watching Sarah's biometric data. Heart rate steady, breathing controlled, no signs of panic or hesitation. Tommy froze when it mattered, Reese continued. He saw the spotter, got target fixation, and forgot to scan his entire sector. One mistake, just one. And the IED that spotter called in turned my teammates into hamburger meat. I held Marcus Williams while he died. Yes, that Marcus, Hayes' best friend, the reason Hayes is even on this op. I promised Marcus I'd get his family home safe. I promised him I'd never let confidence override competence again. Jack, Okoye placed her hand on his shoulder. Listen to what you just said. Tommy froze. Tommy made a mistake. Tommy wasn't ready. She pointed at Sarah's vitals on the screen. Does that look like someone who's freezing? Does that look like someone who's not ready? On the tactical display, the timestamp showed 0546, 30. 30 seconds until Nazari's routine would bring him to the window. 30 seconds until Sarah would either make history or become another cautionary tale about hubris and failure. Reese's mind raced through scenarios, probabilities, outcomes. If he ordered her to stand down and the airstrike tomorrow killed those children, he'd have to live with that. If he authorized the shot and she missed, Nazari would disappear and American soldiers would continue dying from his operations. If he authorized the shot and she took casualties from compromised position, more blood on his hands. But there was another possibility, one that terrified him more than any of the others. What if she made the shot? What if everything he'd believed about limitations, about women in combat, about the natural order of warfare, what if all of it was wrong? Sir, the communications officer called out. We need a decision. Chen is requesting final authorization. Reese closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw 6 men burning in Ramadi. He saw Tommy Hendrix's face, frozen in horror. He saw 18 years of guilt and certainty and protective walls built from trauma and loss. Then he saw Sarah Chen's qualification scores, her mission record, the respect in Hayes' voice when he talked about her, the certainty in her transmission. He opened his eyes and keyed the radio, his voice heavy with the weight of dead men and impossible choices. One shot, Chen. God help us both make it count. Patricia Okoye exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The TOC remained frozen in terrible silence. And on a ridge 3,247 meters from Hassan Nazari, Sarah Chen's finger began its final pressure on the trigger. Hassan Nazari stepped to the window at precisely 0547, 00, just as he had every morning for the past 6 weeks. The porcelain teacup in his hands was delicate, painted with intricate blue patterns, a gift from a Saudi benefactor who appreciated his work destabilizing the region. Steam rose from the cup in delicate spirals, catching the first rays of the rising sun. He had no idea that death was watching him through a scope from over 2 miles away. Through her optics, Sarah could see incredible detail despite the distance, the embroidery on his white shalwar camis, the gray threading through his beard, even the slight smile on his face as he gazed toward the eastern mountains. He looked peaceful, content, a man without conscience enjoying a quiet moment before prayers. This was the man who'd orchestrated the Kandahar marketplace bombing, who'd filmed himself executing humanitarian workers, who'd sent children wearing suicide vests into crowded bazaars. Through her scope, he looked almost human. Sarah's crosshairs weren't even close to him. They hovered in empty air, 3 feet above his head and 2 feet to the right, an aiming point so absurd that anyone watching would think she'd completely lost her mind. But this wasn't guesswork. This was physics. This was mathematics. This was 10,000 hours of training distilled into one perfect moment. Wind holding steady at 12 knots, Marcus whispered beside her, his voice barely audible. Temperature 43 degrees. Pressure 29.79. You're good. You're good. Nazari lifted the teacup to his lips, took a slow sip, savoring the flavor. He lowered the cup, turned slightly toward Mecca, and then, as predicted, he paused. 3 seconds of perfect stillness. Now. Sarah's breathing stopped between heartbeats, the sacred pause between exhale and inhale where the body becomes perfectly still, where even the heart's beating seems to suspend. Her father had taught her this in the Montana wilderness. Baby girl, there's a moment between breaths where you stop being human and become pure intention. Find that moment. Live in that moment. She was in that moment now. Her finger completed its squeeze so smoothly, so gradually, that the rifle's firing almost surprised her. The massive .50 BMG round exploded from the barrel with a thunderous crack that rolled across the Hindu Kush like the voice of God himself. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, 58 foot-pounds of energy that she absorbed with practiced ease, never losing sight picture. The bullet left the muzzle at 2,799 feet per second, spinning at 240,000 revolutions per minute from the rifle's barrel rifling. In the first microsecond, it was already beginning its long, arcing journey through the thin mountain air. And then came the waiting. 7.2 seconds, an eternity compressed into a handful of heartbeats. Marcus began counting down, his voice steady but tight with tension. 7. The bullet crossed the first 1,000 meters, already beginning to drop as gravity asserted its relentless pull. The wind at this altitude pushed it left, then right as it crossed different air currents. Inside the copper jacket, the lead core maintained its perfect spiral, cutting through atmosphere like a knife through silk. 6. Sarah remained frozen in position, her eye pressed to the scope, tracking the invisible arc of mathematics and faith. She couldn't see the bullet, no one could at this distance, but in her mind she saw it perfectly. She'd visualized this shot so many times that it felt like watching a memory rather than creating a new one. 5. The bullet crossed 2,000 meters, dropping now at an accelerating rate. The Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, nudged it microscopically to the right. Temperature gradients created invisible currents that pushed and pulled at the projectile like ghostly hands trying to knock it off course. 4. Through the scope, Sarah watched Nazari, still motionless in his moment of prayer, completely unaware that his death was screaming toward him at supersonic speed. The children in the schoolyard below him were playing, their laughter silent across the distance but visible in their animated movements. 3. Marcus's hand gripped his spotting scope so hard his knuckles turned white. He'd seen impossible shots before, had called wind for some of the best snipers in the world, but never anything like this. This defied everything he knew about ballistics, about probability, about what was humanly possible. 2. The bullet crossed 3,000 meters, its velocity bleeding off from air resistance but still carrying devastating kinetic energy. It had dropped more than 700 feet from Sarah's line of sight, following a rainbow arc that would seem random to anyone who didn't understand the science. But Sarah understood. She'd solved this equation 1,000 times in her mind. 1. Through the scope, Sarah saw it happen in crystalline slow motion. The bullet arrived. Hassan Nazari's chest exploded in a pink mist as the .50 caliber round struck him dead center in the sternum, the massive projectile transferring 13,000 foot-pounds of energy into his body in a fraction of a second. The physics were brutal and absolute. Hydrostatic shock waves rippled through his torso, his heart and lungs rupturing instantly. The porcelain teacup fell from his hands, tumbling through the air, shattering on the stone floor in a spray of hot liquid and blue ceramic fragments. Nazari dropped like a puppet with cut strings, dead before his brain could process pain. 0, Marcus whispered, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Holy Mother of God, 0. For one frozen moment, Sarah stared through her scope at the window where Hassan Nazari had stood 1 second ago. Her mind struggled to process what her training had executed. She just made a shot that shouldn't exist, that violated every conventional wisdom about the limits of human capability. The compound below erupted in chaos. Fighters scrambled from buildings, weapons raised, searching frantically for the source of the shot. Some looked west, some looked south. None looked east because the distance was so extreme that the crack of the rifle had dissipated before reaching them. They had no idea where death had come from. "Sarah," Marcus grabbed her shoulder, breaking her trance. "Sarah, we need to move, now." She blinked, the spell broken, and muscle memory took over. They began breaking down the rifle system with practiced efficiency. Bolt out, magazine removed, optic covers on. 30 seconds. That's all they had before enemy forces might triangulate their position using sound detection equipment. As she packed the Macmillan TAC-50 into its case, her hands finally began to tremble. She'd just rewritten the record books. She just saved 47 children's lives. She just proved every doubter wrong. And she just disobeyed a direct order from her commanding officer. "Move," Marcus hissed, already heading down the ridge toward their extraction point 2 clicks away. Sarah took one last look at the compound through her naked eyes. No scope, no technology, just the human eye trying to see something over 2 miles distant. It was impossible to make out any detail. Impossible to believe she just killed a man at that distance. But the evidence was undeniable. "Impossible," she whispered to herself, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Then she turned and ran. Sarah and Marcus moved down the ridge with the fluid efficiency of operators who trained together for months, their boots finding purchase on loose scree without dislodging rocks that might give away their position. Behind them, 2 miles distant, the compound continued to erupt in confusion, fighters running in all directions, vehicles starting up, someone firing an AK-47 wildly into the western hills. They had no idea where the shot came from. The distance was so extreme, so beyond the realm of possibility, that their tactical response was pure chaos. Marcus kept glancing back at Sarah as they moved, his expression cycling between awe, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. "That was fucking impossible," he muttered for the 5th time, his southern drawl thick with emotion. "Sarah, you understand that was physically impossible, right? That shot doesn't exist. It can't exist." Sarah didn't respond, focused entirely on reaching the extraction point, a dried riverbed 3 kilometers east where a Marine Force recon helicopter would extract them in 45 minutes. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline that she'd suppressed during the shot flooding her system like a dam breaking. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. But the magnitude of what she'd just accomplished, and the consequences that would follow, were beginning to crash over her like a wave. At Bagram Airfield, the Tactical Operations Center had erupted into controlled chaos. The moment the drone footage confirmed the kill, every operator in the room started talking at once. The communications officer was already calling up the chain of command. Intelligence analysts were rewinding the footage, watching the shot's impact over and over. Someone started clapping, then stopped when they realized no one else was joining in. Commander Reese stood perfectly still at the tactical display, his face unreadable as he watched the compound's confusion play out in real time. His hands gripped the console edge so tightly that his knuckles had gone bloodless white. "Get me the exact distance," he said quietly. "Verified and confirmed. I want 3 independent measurements." The intelligence chief, a civilian analyst named Dr. Marcus Webb, who'd been calculating ballistics for special operations for 15 years, worked his computer with flying fingers. "Running GPS coordinates now, sir. Chen's position at time of shot versus target location, accounting for elevation differential." He paused, double-checking his numbers. "Sir, preliminary calculation shows 3,247 meters. That's not possible." "Run it again," Reese ordered. Webb ran the calculation twice more, using different measurement protocols. Each time, the number came back the same, 3,247 meters. Lieutenant Commander Okoye stepped beside Reese, her voice soft. "Jack, do you understand what just happened? That's the second longest confirmed kill in military history. Only 293 meters short of the world record set by a Canadian JTF-2 sniper, and that sniper had multiple days, perfect conditions, and unlimited ammunition. She had one bullet, someone whispered from across the TOC. One fucking bullet, another voice confirmed. Reese finally moved, pulling up the complete ballistic analysis on his screen. Wind compensation, 4.2 milliradians. Elevation adjustment, 47.3 milliradians. Coriolis effect calculation, 0.8 milliradians. Time of flight, 7.2 seconds. Bullet drop, 784 feet. Every single variable had to be perfect. Every single calculation had to be exact. And Sarah Chen had made it look easy. She disobeyed a direct order, Reese said quietly, but there was no heat in his voice. Just confusion, like a man watching his entire worldview crumble in real time. She saved 47 children and eliminated a high-value target that we've been hunting for 3 years, Okoye countered. Jack, this is going up the chain. By tomorrow, this will be on the Admiral's desk. By next week, it might be on the Secretary of Defense's desk. This isn't just a successful mission, this is historic. Reese turned to look at her and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before, genuine uncertainty. I told her it was impossible. I ordered her to stand down. I was so sure. His voice trailed off. You were protecting your team based on 18 years of experience, Okoye said gently. No one can fault you for that. But I was wrong. The words seemed to physically hurt him. I was wrong about the shot. I was wrong about her capabilities. I was wrong about. He stopped himself, but they both knew what he was about to say, wrong about women in combat. The communications officer called out, Sir, Chen and Hayes are en route to Extraction Point Alpha. ETA 42 minutes. Marine Hello is wheels up in 20. Good, Reese said absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. Dr. Webb approached with a tablet, his expression troubled. Commander, I've run the environmental analysis. The shot Chen made. The probability of success given the conditions was approximately 3.7%. That's accounting for her skill level, which I rated as exceptional. Any average sniper attempting that shot would have had a success probability of less than 0.5%. She beat 96% odds, Okoye said with something like pride in her voice. She beat physics itself, Webb corrected. Sir, with respect, I've been analyzing sniper shots for 15 years across multiple conflict zones. I've seen shots that seemed impossible until you broke down the math. This shot, he shook his head. This shot required not just skill but perfect intuition about variables that can't be precisely calculated. Wind shifts that happen during the bullet's flight, temperature microclimates, air density variations. She compensated for things she couldn't possibly have known about. Reese stared at the frozen frame on the screen. The moment of impact, Nazari's chest exploding, the teacup falling. Or she got lucky. No one gets that lucky, Jack, Okoye said firmly. That was skill, pure, undeniable skill. The TOC fell silent as everyone processed what had just happened. Then the communications officer spoke again. Sir, we have a problem. Social media is already picking up reports of a supernatural sniper in the Hindu Kush. Taliban fighters are posting that Nazari was killed by a ghost weapon because no one heard the shot. They're calling it an American drone strike with a secret weapon. Reese almost smiled. Let them think that. The longer they believe in ghosts, the longer they underestimate what we're capable of. He turned to his executive officer. When Chen gets back, I want her in my office immediately. Before the debrief, before the after-action report, before anyone else talks to her. What are you going to say to her? Okoye asked. Reese's jaw tightened. I'm going to ask her how the hell she made a shot that I told her was impossible. And then, he paused, the weight of his next words hanging heavy. Then I'm going to decide whether she's the best sniper I've ever seen or the most reckless operator who just got catastrophically lucky. 6 hours later, as the sun began to set over Bagram Airfield, a dusty Marine helicopter touched down on the flight line. Sarah Chen climbed out, her rifle case slung over her shoulder, her face covered in dust and exhaustion. A young private approached her. "Lieutenant Chen, Commander Reese wants to see you immediately, ma'am," he said, and I quote, "before you do anything else." Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked at Marcus, who gave her a supportive nod but couldn't hide his concern. "Good luck," he said quietly. "You're about to find out if you're a hero or if you just ended your career." Sarah squared her shoulders, adjusted her rifle case, and began the long walk to Commander Reese's office, where her fate, and possibly the fate of every woman who would come after her, would be decided. Commander Reese's office felt smaller than Sarah remembered, the walls closing in as she stood at rigid attention before his gunmetal desk. The room smelled of old coffee and gun oil, and the silence was so thick she could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock behind her. Reese sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the desk, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes he said nothing, just stared, evaluating, judging. Finally he spoke. "You disobeyed a direct order." His voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow felt more dangerous than anger. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A direct order to abort mission and fall back to extraction." Reese leaned forward slightly. "An order given by your commanding officer during an active operation in a hostile combat zone." "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that disobeying orders in combat is a court-martial offense? That I could end your career right now, today, and no one would question it?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained eye contact. "I understand, sir." Reese stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor like a gunshot. He walked to the window overlooking the airfield, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in a posture of rigid control. "Explain to me," he said quietly, "how you justified ignoring a direct order from your commanding officer. And before you answer, Lieutenant, understand that I've heard every excuse, every rationalization, every piece of combat logic from operators who thought they knew better than their commanders. So don't insult my intelligence with bullshit about tactical flexibility." Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I made a tactical assessment based on time-sensitive intelligence and immediate threat to civilian lives. The airstrike scheduled for tomorrow would have put 47 children in the blast radius. Waiting for another opportunity meant Nazari would likely relocate, and those children would die. So you decided their lives were worth risking your entire team." Reese turned sharply. "Worth exposing your position. Worth attempting a shot that every tactical manual, every ballistic expert, every goddamn law of physics said was impossible." "I didn't think it was impossible, sir. I knew I could make it." Reese's laugh was harsh and bitter. You knew." He strode back to his desk, pulling up the ballistic analysis on his computer and spinning it to face her. "Do you see these numbers, Lieutenant? 3.7% probability of success. Bullet drop of 784 feet. Wind compensation across 3 different air currents. 7.2 seconds of flight time during which 1,000 variables could have changed." He leaned across the desk, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're telling me you knew you could compensate for variables that the best ballistic computers in the world can barely calculate? You're telling me you knew you could make a shot that world record holders wouldn't attempt?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm telling you." The silence that followed was explosive. Reese stared at her like she'd grown a second head, his expression cycling between disbelief and something that might have been grudging respect. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head. "Unfucking believable. You're either the most skilled operator I've ever met or you're dangerously delusional with a god complex." "With respect, sir, the results speak for themselves." "The results," Reese's voice rose. "The results are that you got lucky. You made a cowboy play that happened to work out and now you think that justifies everything." "It wasn't luck," Sarah's composure finally cracked, her voice sharp with conviction. It was 10,000 hours of training. It was understanding ballistics at a level that goes beyond formulas and computers. It was reading environmental conditions, trusting my calculations, and executing with precision. She took a step forward, her eyes blazing. "You want to know the truth, Commander? The truth is that I've spent my entire military career being told what I can't do, can't make it through boot camp, can't pass scout sniper school, can't handle combat stress, can't be trusted with the same missions as men. Every single step, someone like you has been waiting for me to fail so you can say, 'See, I told you women don't belong here.'" Reese's face darkened. "Lieutenant, you're very close to crossing a line." "I've been across that line since the day I put on this uniform." Sarah's voice carried years of suppressed frustration. "You didn't believe I could make that shot because you didn't want to believe I could make it. Because if I could, it meant everything you've believed about women in combat might be wrong. It meant your precious assumptions about capability and gender might be nothing but bias wrapped in tradition." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Reese's hands slowly clenched into fists, his jaw muscles working as he fought for control. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "You think this is about gender. You think I oppose women in combat because of some outdated sexist belief system. Isn't it?" Sarah challenged. "No," Reese slammed his hand on the desk, the sound like a gunshot in the small office. "It's about Ramadi. It's about watching 6 of my brothers die because I trusted someone's confidence over tactical doctrine. It's about holding Marcus Williams, Hayes's best friend, while he bled out in my arms because some hotshot kid thought he was good enough when he wasn't." His voice cracked with emotion he'd kept buried for 18 years. "I swore on their graves that I would never let emotion override sound tactical judgment again, that I would never trust gut instinct over proven doctrine, that I would protect my teams by following the rules that keep people alive." He walked to the photo on his wall, his team from Ramadi, half of them dead. "When women started integrating into combat roles, everyone told me it was the future, that I needed to adapt, that my concerns were just prejudice." He turned back to her and Sarah saw genuine pain in his eyes. "But all I could see was more risk, more variables, more chances for emotion to cloud judgment and get people killed." Sarah's anger softened slightly. "Sir, those men didn't die because someone was emotional. They died because war is brutal and unpredictable. You can follow every rule, every tactical doctrine, and people still die. That's the nature of combat." "I know that," Reese said quietly. "Intellectually, I know that, but knowing something and accepting it are different things." He returned to his desk, suddenly looking older, more tired. "You made a shot today that I told you was impossible. A shot that by every metric, every calculation, every piece of conventional wisdom should have failed." He looked up at her. "And you made it look easy. Do you understand what that does to someone who's spent 18 years building their entire command philosophy on predictability and control?" Sarah stood silent, understanding beginning to dawn. "It terrifies me, Lieutenant." Reese's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because if you can make the impossible possible, it means I don't know the limits anymore. It means everything I thought I understood about capability, about risk, about what's achievable, all of it might be wrong." He pulled out her personnel file, opening it to her qualification scores, her mission reports, the glowing recommendation from Marcus Hayes. "You've earned your place on this team 10 times over. You've proven your skill beyond any doubt. And he paused, the words clearly difficult. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about what you could achieve. And I was wrong to let my ghosts and my biases cloud my judgment about what women warriors are capable of." Reese stood and extended his hand across the desk. "You're one of the finest snipers I've ever commanded, Lieutenant Chen. Gender doesn't take the shot, skill does, and your skill is exceptional." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the weight of 18 years of pain and prejudice beginning to lift from both of them. That said, Reese continued, his grip tightening slightly, you still disobeyed a direct order, and that can't go unaddressed. Sarah's heart sank. I understand, sir. You'll receive a formal reprimand in your file, Reese said, and you'll write a detailed after-action report explaining your tactical decision-making process. That report will be used to update our doctrine on long-range engagement protocols. He released her hand. You'll also receive a Navy Cross for valor in combat. The paperwork is already being processed, and he almost smiled. You're being reassigned. Sarah's stomach dropped, sir. To the advanced sniper training program at Coronado. As an instructor, Reese's expression was unreadable. Turns out the Navy wants the person who made the second longest confirmed kill in military history teaching the next generation of snipers, male and female. Sarah stood speechless, her mind struggling to process the abrupt reversal. Dismissed, Lieutenant, Reese said, and Chen. Yes, sir. Thank you for proving me wrong. The teams are stronger because of warriors like you. 3 months later, Sarah stood before a classroom of 32 sniper candidates at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a sea of faces, 24 men and 8 women, all wearing the same expression of nervous determination she remembered from her own time in this very room. Some stared at her with open skepticism, others with cautious hope, a few with the kind of hungry intensity that reminded her of herself 3 years ago, outsiders desperate to prove they belonged. Commander Reese sat in the back corner, arms crossed, watching silently. He'd insisted on attending her first class, though he hadn't explained why. Sarah suspected he was still wrestling with his own transformation, still trying to reconcile the warrior he'd become with the commander he wanted to be. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd earned every word. Some of you know who I am because of a shot I made in the Hindu Kush Mountains 3 months ago. A shot that made headlines, broke records, and got analyzed by every ballistics expert in the military. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. I'm not here to talk about that shot. Confusion rippled through the classroom. One of the male candidates, a cocky-looking SEAL with a high-end tight haircut, raised his hand. Ma'am, with respect, isn't that exactly why you're here? To teach us how to make impossible shots? Sarah smiled slightly. What's your name, sailor? Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell, ma'am. Tell me something, Mitchell. What do you think made that shot successful? My rifle, my scope, the perfect alignment of stars and wind conditions. Mitchell hesitated. Your skill, ma'am. Partially correct. Sarah walked to the whiteboard and wrote a single word in large letters, preparation. The shot took 7.2 seconds, but the preparation took 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours of learning to read wind through grass movement. 10,000 hours of understanding barometric pressure, temperature gradients, and the Coriolis effect. 10,000 hours of failure, adjustment, and incremental improvement. She turned back to the class. Every one of you wants to know the secret to making impossible shots. Here it is. There's no such thing as an impossible shot. There are only shots you're not yet prepared to make. One of the female candidates, a petite Marine Corps sergeant with sharp eyes, leaned forward. Ma'am, how do you deal with people who tell you that you can't make the shot, that you don't belong? Sarah recognized the question beneath the question, the doubt, the constant pressure, the exhausting need to prove yourself again and again. She'd lived that question for years. What's your name, Marine? Sergeant Rebecca Torres, ma'am. Sergeant Torres, in my career, I've been told I couldn't do something approximately 1,000 times. Can't make it through boot camp. Can't pass sniper school. Can't handle combat stress. Can't be trusted with the same missions as men. Sarah's voice hardened with conviction. And every single time I let my performance do the talking, not my words, not my arguments, my results. She walked down the center aisle, making eye contact with each candidate. Some of you will face that doubt because of your gender, others because of your size, your background, your age, or any number of factors that have nothing to do with your actual capability. Here's what I want you to understand. Doubt is just another variable to calculate, like wind, like distance, like bullet drop. Sarah stopped at the front of the room. You can't control whether other people doubt you. You can only control whether you doubt yourself. And I'm here to tell you that self-doubt is the only limitation that actually matters. She clicked a remote, and a series of images appeared on the screen behind her, not of her famous shot, but of training exercises, failed attempts, and incremental progress. This is what excellence looks like. Not one perfect shot, but 10,000 imperfect shots that taught me something. Not one moment of glory, but years of grinding discipline when no one was watching. Mitchell raised his hand again. Ma'am, did you ever doubt yourself before that shot in Afghanistan? Sarah paused, remembering that frozen moment on the ridge. Marcus telling her it was impossible, Commander Reese ordering her to stand down, every rational voice screaming that she should abort. Yes, she said honestly. For about 5 seconds I doubted everything. The math, the conditions, my own capabilities. And then I remembered something my father told me when I was 15 years old, attempting a shot I had no business taking. She smiled at the memory. He said, "Baby girl, doubt is just fear wearing a fancy disguise. Strip away the disguise, look at the fear directly, and you'll realize it's smaller than you thought." So I looked at my doubt, broke it down into variables I could measure and calculate, and discovered it wasn't doubt at all. It was just math I hadn't finished solving. The classroom was absolutely silent now, every candidate leaning forward, absorbing every word. The shot itself took 7.2 seconds, Sarah continued. But the moment I stopped doubting and started calculating, that took less than 1 second. That's the difference between good snipers and exceptional ones. Good snipers know their limitations. Exceptional snipers know that limitations are just variables that haven't been solved yet. She walked back to the front of the room, her expression serious. Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. I'm going to put you in situations that seem impossible. I'm going to ask you to make calculations that hurt your brain and take shots that defy your confidence. And some of you will fail. Sarah let that sink in. But failure isn't the opposite of success. Failure is the foundation of success. Every missed shot teaches you something. Every miscalculation refines your understanding. Every moment of doubt gives you an opportunity to choose courage over comfort. In the back of the room, Commander Reese uncrossed his arms, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was the warrior he'd failed to see 3 months ago, not because she wasn't there, but because his own limitations had blinded him. "You're not here to become me," Sarah said firmly. "You're here to become the best version of yourself. Male, female, big, small, experienced, or brand new, none of that matters. What matters is whether you're willing to do the work that excellence demands." She paused, looking each candidate in the eye. "I don't care about your gender. I don't care about your background. I care about whether you can master the variables, trust the math, and execute with precision when lives depend on it. Because that's what being a sniper means. That's what being a warrior means." Sergeant Torres raised her hand. "Ma'am, what's the most important lesson you learned from that shot in Afghanistan?" Sarah considered the question carefully. That Commander Reese was right. Shock rippled through the classroom. In the back, Reese's eyebrows raised slightly. "He told me the shot was impossible," Sarah continued. "And by every conventional standard, every traditional measure of what's achievable, he was correct. That shot should have failed. The odds were astronomically against success." She smiled. "But what I learned is that impossible is just a word we use to describe things we haven't figured out how to do yet. And the moment you accept that definition, you stop being limited by other people's understanding of what's possible." She walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where she'd once struggled to prove herself. 3 months ago, I made a shot that the best snipers in the world said couldn't be made. Today, that shot is already being studied, analyzed, and incorporated into training doctrine. Tomorrow, one of you might make a shot that makes mine look easy." Sarah turned back to face them. That's how progress works. Someone does the impossible and it becomes the new standard. The ceiling becomes the floor, and the next generation reaches higher. Mitchell spoke up, his earlier cockiness replaced with genuine curiosity. "Ma'am, if you could go back to that moment on the ridge, knowing everything you know now, would you still take the shot?" Sarah didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Because 47 children went to school the next day instead of dying in an airstrike. Because a high-value target who'd killed dozens of Americans was eliminated. Because I proved to myself, and hopefully to others, that capability isn't determined by gender but by skill, preparation, and courage. She looked at the 8 female candidates specifically. Some of you will face doubt that your male counterparts never experience. You'll be questioned more, scrutinized more, and held to different standards. That's the reality. But here's what I want you to remember. Every time you prove a doubter wrong, you make it easier for the next woman who comes after you. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for every female warrior who will follow in your footsteps. Then she looked at the male candidates. "And some of you will serve alongside female snipers, just like Petty Officer Hayes served alongside me. Your job isn't to protect them or make exceptions for them. Your job is to trust their skill, respect their capability, and execute the mission together. Because at the end of the day, bullets don't care about gender. Neither should warriors." Commander Reese stood from his chair in the back, drawing every eye in the room. He walked slowly to the front, stopping beside Sarah. "Lieutenant Chen is right," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. 3 months ago, I failed as a commander. I let my ghosts and my prejudices override my tactical judgment. I looked at one of the finest snipers I've ever commanded and saw limitations that existed only in my own mind. He turned to face the candidates. "Every one of you will face moments where you have to choose between comfortable assumptions and uncomfortable truth, between the way things have always been and the way things could be. I chose wrong. Lieutenant Chen chose right. Learn from both of us." Reese extended his hand to Sarah, and she shook it, a public acknowledgement that carried more weight than any medal or commendation. The Navy SEALs, the Marine Corps Scout Snipers, every special operations unit in this military, were only as strong as our weakest link, Reese continued. "Lieutenant Chen isn't our weakest link. She's raising the standard for everyone, male and female alike." He nodded to Sarah and returned to his seat, leaving her to continue the class. Sarah took a breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity settle on her shoulders. "All right, candidates, enough philosophy. Let's talk about wind reading at extreme distances. Mitchell, what's the primary factor affecting bullet drift at ranges beyond 2,000 meters?" As the class shifted into technical instruction, Sarah caught Commander Reese's eye one more time. He gave her a subtle nod, respect between warriors who'd both learned that growth requires the courage to admit when you're wrong. The lesson continued. The candidates took notes, and somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains, the wind still blew across a ridge where the impossible had become reality. Because Lieutenant Sarah Chen had proven that the only true limitation is the one you accept. And she accepted none. The end.